Okay, this is a little example of the last video that I made, and I just want to point something out. Now, this can be any instrument that's happening, a break that has guitar parts and flutes, and or an orchestra part that has different parts that are doing some type of break, or main vocal parts that have harmonies mixed in with them sometimes and things like that. But basically, the thing that I wanted to point out in this first part of this example is that basically the timbers, that they're going to be a lot of times fairly wide. It's not just going to be the primary timber. And if you go back and deal with it and you watch this series about EQing the way I was speaking of, that, and doing with some automation on it with this last part, or this part in part 5, that you can go back and deal with it. And even if you don't, and you're dealing with a mix like this, like this right here, that, you try to get as much done with it beforehand, and that technique of EQing, so that whatever EQ work you're doing on that vocal, or the harmony part that's going with the vocal, or the violin that's going with the cello, or whatever, any combination or whatever might be happening there, that, if it's like this right here, I'll loop this right here, and you watch the vocals in this area, when she starts to sing, how they jump up, and they're kind of erratic. So, in the mix, sometimes it's hard to really pinpoint what exactly you're trying to attenuate. There's some harmony vocals in there. Some of the instruments are actually pushing those frequencies up also, which makes it look like the vocals are louder than they probably are, because of other frequencies from maybe the guitar, the bass, the drums, the keyboards in there also, and going back and look at it. But also that for this part of the sculpting it, that you go back to that vocal and the solo track of it, or the group of it, and EQ, like I was talking about, with actually trying to use some automation on it, even if it's light automation, even if you just got just a little bit of automation, not much. Sometimes it can be a lot, and sometimes it can be real simple, just a little teeny subtraction that follows that vocal around, or whatever area you're having an issue with, so it maintains this flow of where those vocals are going, so that it's attenuated properly and it's EQ'd. I mean, nobody sings a whole song going, they flow down and up, and their vocals move around, all over the place like a tree in the wind, it's flowing and moving around all over and doesn't stay static. So here's just a really simple example. If you look right here, now, if you look at that, and that's the song Rihanna. Now, if you watched right in there what was happening, I'll play it again, that right here, when the vocals start, now, if you're looking at that and you're trying to pinpoint what the issue is exactly, and it's moving around in an area that's maybe all the way from here up to here with the harmonies behind it, and you're trying to figure out what that is. First off, you had gone back and done it to that track and that group with automation to where it followed it, you have probably done a pretty good job on it anyway. But even at this point, that you're still having a little bit of issue, like you're sitting here listening to that, and you're watching this main vocal part climb up, come down, come back up, come back down here, and some of the harmony issues that were happening there also. And just a little dip right here, it really, when it goes back down, it comes back up. And then harmony parts there also, that you're not really dressing it really well. Sometimes a really wide cue and a little dip will work really well. But if you're trying to boost it and you're really doing some serious work where you might have to attenuate or boost a lot for some certain area, that you shouldn't have to by now, but even if you have to, that it's really hard to do it statically like that. So there's just a real simple example. You're going to put that on there, you're going to find where that first comes on there in your mix, and then it's starting there, and you're going to automate it to where it follows it up there, and it follows it back down there. That way that you're addressing the issue. And sometimes you might put two of them on there. Sometimes you might put two of them next to each other like this, because it's a little bit wider band or something like that, or it's shaped a little bit differently. Like if you want it to come down like that, then you want to bring the Q up like this a little bit. So, and then bring that Q up, and the other one adjust where the Q's coming down a little bit, because you're actually trying to sculpt that through there to shape it more along the lines of the mix. That can be a visual thing, and sometimes that visual thing, it's a huge cue that something's standing out a little bit too much, and if you can shape it back down into the rest of the vocals or the rest of the harmony parts or the rest of the timbres of the actual composition, or I should say the components, the frequency components in the spectrum of the mix, that it's actually going to work like that really well. And then it's following it. Does that make sense? And you've actually sculpted it to, it's actually, then you bring it up a little bit, down a little bit, up just a little bit, you know, with your automation. After you got your automation set, then you can raise the gain up a little bit on both of those or whatever, or bring them down a little bit and let it ride through that section and really see what it's doing, you know, so that it's really sculpted and you don't have a bunch of frequencies that are jumping out all over the place and you're missing the frequencies. And you've really taken the time to sculpt that part, so that when you get to this part in the mix, that you've really taken either the simple automation or the simple EQ work you should have to do at the end of your mix, because you've already done a really good job in the process of your EQ work. And if you watched all the series, that it should be very minor for the most part, but those minor parts, to do them well like that, to where it's EQ'd correctly, your EQ, and you've listened, you've looked at it, use your eyes and your ears, you know, those are cues. Sometimes it won't be, you got to be real careful, but you got to make sure, because something will stick up and you'll start trying to EQ it, and it's like, well, it really doesn't need to be EQ'd there, dude, it just doesn't, you know, it's okay. And you start messing with it, and you'll find a lot of times that if it's sticking out and you can visually see it, that it's a problem. If you start messing with it a little bit, you'll find that it probably is a little bit of an issue. Maybe not a huge issue, but, you know, every little bit helps. You know, the better you make it, the better it is. That's just a fact, you know. I mean, the more time you spend on it, the better it's going to be. And those simple kind of things can just really make it, push your mix over the edge and your EQ work over the edge. But that's just one example. So that's for the mix, like if you have a mix, because sometimes just at the end you have just a little bit of work to do. I mean, not much. It might just be a little dip up in here or a little raise up in the higher end or something. And, you know, when you start hearing that, go back a couple steps back to the other groups and tracks if you watch this series to understand that. And, you know, try to address it there. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you've got a mix of instruments and you don't want to spend, trying to, drop down every one of those instruments, 0.3 dB, and then messing, and you go, well, it's not that bad, and I can go ahead and take that group in the mix and go ahead and attenuate it a little bit right there. I'm not going to worry. I can tell by the timbres that I'm not going to be affecting it that much, and so I can go ahead and EQ them as a group from the mix standpoint rather than going back a step. But you really should think about that before you make that decision. Can you go back a step? If you can, and it's going to affect the mix better, do that. So that was the first example. Now this second example, like I said, these examples it's pretty. I'm trying to keep it real simple, but this would go for any instrument or any vocal or any kind of thing you're dealing. You're going back a step to deal with that. And the issue is, if you watch these frequencies while this plays, if you watch this is a vocal part, and you watch this main frequency as it climbs up and down, and you look at the side band frequencies that are falling off and following it around, and where all it's going. And another thing you want to look at is, if you look back in here really closely, that as it goes through its cycle of that performance, that these frequencies don't stay static at volume levels. Their distance, is going to be fairly, they're going to fall along fairly consistently, going up and down following the primary frequency, the primary note that the timbre is based upon. But the volumes of them sometimes are going to change. And sometimes when you're doing a vocal or any type of instrument, You know, sometimes the way they're playing it, articulations, hitting it harder or softening dynamics, or playing it in a different position on the instrument is going to affect the timbre differently. And depending on how good they are and how well they can perform, you know, that it's going to really make a difference how much time you have to spend on it. I mean, you get somebody that's a really good violin player, and they're consistent all over the fretboard, and they're consistent in every dang way you can think of, an awesome performer, that the chances are you're going to love that individual because you aren't going to have to mess with their stuff too much. You still probably want to look at it and see what you can do to clean it up and make it sound better. But the better of a performer they are and the better of a capture you get, the less time you probably have to spend messing with it. But like, here's a prime example, this fifth frequency up here, that basically you'll watch it and it's low, it's higher than this other timbre over here, then it's lower than it, and it just jumps around. In some spots it really has an issue where it starts climbing up. And I actually did some attenuating on it and sculpting on it. I did the automation to follow the primary frequency around as I go up and down in the spectrum, and then copied that to that one, and then did some attenuating on it. And basically it worked out to that when I put an attenuation on it right here, that I tried to make sure that it wasn't affecting it, you know, it too bad. That way if it went down a little bit and it wasn't too loud at that part, that the attenuation I had put to follow it around, you know, and the cue I had put on it, you know, that it wasn't going to affect it too much unless it was trying to come up, like compressing it. You know, compressing that one frequency so that it wasn't interfering with the rest of the timbre of the vocal as it flowed through the performance. And another issue can be issues up in here. You can see this comes up to around in here, and then you got roll off right there, and then you got like these two humps, all right? And so, you know, that's almost can look like comb filtering distortion, but that not really pertinent. But the issue is, as it comes up or down and it gets moving around, it's not static, you know. I mean, this between here and here is 2K. Between here and here is 1K looking at spectrogram, but up in here, between here and here, can be as like 5K. And you got from here to here to 5K, so it's closer together. So it may be moving around a lot more than you think. Does that make sense? And so when you're working up in this area, you want to really fine tune that anyway, because the frequency spectrum is really close together. You deal with it the same way you do down here, you'll have an issue because they're more spread out. Does that make sense? Because normally that's, you know, that's a centered area. So anyway, basically that's kind of what the example is supposed to be, so that when you got timbres and doing that automation, that even if you do a sculpt, you know, and you decide, well, I really want those vocals to sculpt like that, and I want them to come up a little bit like that. I want them to flatten out up in that area. And then I want them to drop down like that, just like that. That's exactly how I want those vocals sculpted. Their timbres sculpt. And you listen to it. You take one spot where they're going, ah, 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 or whatever to find out how that timbre affects it. And then you automate this first one, and all the other ones are, you copy and paste that automation to where it follows that primary frequency. And your whole automation that you've done for sculpting that timbre with your EQ follows the whole vocal throughout the entire performance, or the whole instrument throughout the entire performance. And it is very helpful, and it is a very accurate way to EQ. And you will definitely notice it. I mean, it's real obvious that it's not being static and it's flowing. One thing you got to be real careful that I will point out, that when timbres go real low or real high, sometimes the timbre content will change a little bit. So you got to really keep an ear out for that. When something goes way high in the register or way low, that all of a sudden that the timbre content is, its amplitudes may change a little bit. The actual volumes and decibel levels of the different harmonics in the timbre, or whatever it might happen to be in it, might shape a little bit differently. So, and plus that gives you a chance to really look and understand that, you know, really take a look at that while you're doing this to really to view that. So basically that was the second example that I wanted to point out, and hopefully that kind of points it out pretty well. And I sure hope you enjoyed number 5. Peace, hope, love.